And we've seen a lot of changes happening, but the last 12 months, I would say, has probably been the most challenging for all of us involved. And I'm going to give you just a rundown. I'm not going to literally take you through a day-by-day account of what happened last year, because we probably want to put that behind us, and also to realize the fact that it isn't over yet. We're still in the woods. So, I'm just going to give you an account of how the industry has been working together over the last 12 months or so, and how we've come together to keep, the presence of Hadrian's Wall in everyone's minds, and to be prepared so that we can actually welcome visitors back to Hadrian's Wall as soon as it's safe to do so. So I'm going to run you through a few slides. I hope you don't mind. It's just a short PowerPoint, but I'm going to, right. Let's, okay, well, first of all, welcome. My role, as I said, is working for tourism in the National Park Authority, but for the last 12 months, I've also been the acting chair of the Hadrian's Wall Marketing and Transport Delivery Group. This is one of the many delivery groups that sort of meet on a regular basis to basically keep in touch with each other and to share best practice and to deliver a lot of the aims within the management plan that is devised for Hadrian's Wall. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview in terms of how we've responded to COVID-19 in the last 12 months, but also more importantly, talk about some of the lessons that we've learned, because that's really important. And it's been a really interesting year in many ways, because we've really valued that sense of collaboration that has developed over the last 12 months between the different sites and attractions and businesses along the wall. And then looking forward, there's a lot to look forward to, and I'd like to focus a little bit more on that at the end. So who are we? Well, we are a group of representatives, obviously with marketing, tourism and transport interests right across the wall. So it's quite a large partnership. So we have representation from Sen House Museum right over in the west, right over towards Segedunum and Arbea in the east, and everyone in between. We're kind of a ragtag bunch, but we all get on very well. And as I say, it has been a really privilege to sort of work with this group over the last 12 months or so. One of the things one of our responsibilities as a group, as the marketing and delivery group, is that we are also responsible for the hadrianswallcountry.co.uk website. This is the website which obviously acts as a sort of portal really to the Hadrian's Wall. It's the one, if you're Googling Hadrian's Wall, we hope as many people land on it as possible. And the aim isn't just to keep them on this website, it's to give them a welcome, give them some orientation to Hadrian's Wall, and also to then spin them out to the various respective partners, sites, attractions along the wall as well. So it's there to sort of create that sense of welcome, that sense of wonder, to entice you to stay further and to go and do more exploration along the wall, and help to plan your visit to the wall as well. So there are links to obviously transport, and obviously links to accommodation as well. So what I'd like to say is that, as a group, we used to meet probably 2 or 3 times a year. But then at the beginning of the outbreak back in March, we decided that we needed to meet on a more regular basis. And this was really, really important because things were changing so much. We were just spending a lot of time trying to interpret the various guidance that was coming towards us, whether it's from government or elsewhere. And it was a very important time for us to literally just get together on a regular basis. And that sometimes we were meeting on a weekly basis, just to listen to each other and just to hear how each attraction and site was managing, how they were coping, and also sharing best practice as much as possible and raising issues as well. And it was very useful to try and gather that information and to just be there as a supportive body to each other as well. And I think that's been something we can't underestimate. Often, we've all felt somewhat isolated because of the way that, obviously the visitors disappeared, and, it's a very stressful time in terms of loss of income and loss of trade. And, it's a very important role for us just to listen to each other and just to give each other support throughout the pandemic, and also trying to interpret that information that was coming down to us so that we could then communicate it to the visitors and to those that were wanting to find out more information about Hadrian's Wall itself. So the clarification of the communication was really, really important. It also gave us the time to try and monitor trends as well. And there's a lot of market intel being developed by Visit Britain and Visit England that we're interpreting and adapting to on a sort of week-to-week basis. And then, of course, when it was appropriate to do so, we then took action. So whether it was feeding back particular issues to relevant bodies around business support, or just feeding information back to sort of government to say, this is the situation on the ground and this is really what you need to be focusing on. And we also, did a lot of scenario planning. We still are doing a lot of scenario planning because obviously, although we now have a roadmap to the recovery, we don't know how things are going to change. And we've become pretty adept at knowing how to be fleet of foot and to change and adapt accordingly to timescales. And obviously planning of events. Are really important, but many of us have been planning events only to then have to defer them or to postpone them to a later time. So again, the group as a whole has been very adaptive throughout the 12 months. But we weren't stopping still just because, we weren't able to welcome visitors. We decided to take Hadrian's Wall to the people. And that's what we've been doing individually and collectively. So every site along the wall has spent an enormous amount of time putting out blogs, putting out social media, reminding our visitors who are so desperate to come back to Hadrian's Wall about what is going on Hadrian's Wall, even the day-to-day. One of our most popular blogs and social media channels was just checking in to see what the National Trail Ranger was doing on a day-to-day basis, putting in stars and waymarking posts. People wanted to know what was going on and wanting to know that the wall was still being cared for and the attractions and the sites were planning the welcome when that was possible. So a lot of really wonderful information was being put out by the individual sites and attractions along the wall throughout the last 12 months. No one stopped and decided we'll just wait for the visitors to return. We've been very proactive in bringing the Hadrian's Wall out to wherever people want to see and enjoy the wall itself. So this has been ongoing, and I'm not going to be focused on any specific campaign, but there's just to let you know that there was a lot of activity going on, and it's still going on as well. Even more recently, for example, with the Chinese New Year celebrations, taking those opportunities to tap into the calendar of events and linking it to the wall itself. As well as obviously reminding people that Hadrian's Wall is still here and still there to be enjoyed. We also did a lot of work to sort of promote lines of support to businesses along the wall as well. And some of our colleagues on the group have spent a massive amount of time sort of coordinating the various sort of support mechanisms that have been developed for local businesses, which have been extremely useful. The furlough scheme, of course, has been absolutely critical, but some businesses have still struggled. We have to remind ourselves that although the furlough schemes are now many sort of business support grants out there, some, for whatever reason, aren't able to sort of take advantage of them and are finding it difficult. So it's a reminder to us all that the amount of resilience that the industry is showing at the moment is phenomenal. And but the role of the group was really just to share best practice and to signpost businesses to the sort of sources of grants and business support where they existed. In our own way, we also adapted our own website, the Hadrian's Wall Country website. We realized one of the things that everyone is now used to more and more is booking in advance. For many attractions, booking in advance was something that many of us, sort of were experimenting with and developing before the pandemic. I think what we've seen since the pandemic is that every attraction now has had to put in place online booking systems, even to try and identify, appropriate slots to visit attractions at certain times throughout the day. And it's been quite a useful process, really, because it has actually enabled the manager of the respective site and attraction to be able to identify when it's going to be busy throughout the day. So that's actually assisted in terms of the planning of staffing rotas, for example, because you know exactly in advance how many people you're expecting throughout the day. Whereas obviously when people turn up spontaneously, you're not quite sure how busy it's going to be. Hopefully in the future, we can be more spontaneous. We will be able to go and visit these attractions in a more spontaneous manner. But that sense of booking ahead is now become, firmly adopted, I think, by the nation. So as we began to reopen in the summer, there were a lot of things going on. The Visit Britain and Visit England came out with their accreditation. One of the issues that was obviously very apparent right from the outset was, as we begin to reopen, the visitors needed to be reassured. They need to be reassured that the attractions and the sites were safe to visit, that all the hygienic precautions were being implemented, and that they were able to enjoy the experience without worrying too much about, obviously, the pandemic itself. So the We're Good to Go accreditation was widely adopted very rapidly. It came out quite late, but then when it did, everyone took advantage of it. Each respective site spent a lot of time, and still is spending a lot of time, communicating safety messages in a manner that, hopefully is more common sense without it being too dominant in terms of your visitor experience. You want to come out and enjoy the experience, but you also want to know that you're being looked after and cared for. We also put out a lot of information about behavior in the countryside as well. What we did see with the reopening in July was because people weren't able to travel abroad, so many more people were suddenly discovering what was on their doorstep. So we had lots of people, an influx of visitors, literally like a champagne cork out of the bottle, literally desperate to get out into the countryside on a fine, hot, sunny days. They were looking for waterside features. So fountains and rivers and streams were popular destinations for many who just wanted to get out, have some sun, maybe have a barbecue and jump in the river. And that did cause a few problems. We did have, in some instances, occasions where we obviously had some fly camping. We had some issues with litter. We had some issues. One of the things it did highlight was the fact that these new audiences who perhaps were coming out to the countryside for the very first time were unfamiliar with the activities in the countryside, with farming practices. And so on occasions, it did cause some problems, but I would like to make everyone aware that it wasn't blanket right across the countryside. It was only in a few incidences that we were experiencing this relatively poor behavior. For the most part, the majority of visitors who are coming out, even the first time visitors, were extremely well behaved and were just generally very appreciative of the fact that they could actually come out to the countryside and can visit the attractions when they were open. So just really want to make that point clear. But what they were looking for, and one of the things that obviously is to Hadrian's Wall's advantage, is the fact that, we offer tons and tons of open space. This is what people have come to see. They love the wall, they love the heritage, of course, they love the museums and attractions. But what Hadrian's Wall can also offer are miles and miles, the land of the far horizons, of jaw-dropping views in every direction. And I think that's something that we're going to see again, as soon as this weather, looking out the window at the moment, if we have a lot more of this in the future, as we begin to reopen, I think, we're going to be very busy again. And we are better prepared this time. Obviously, last year, everything was happening on a sort of minute-to-minute basis. But I think with that experience, we're going to be better prepared this year to accommodate the sort of larger groups of people coming back out into the countryside. And this is what they're wanting to enjoy, and this is one of the marvelous things about Hadrian's Wall is its landscape setting. And that's something that we don't want to take for granted, and people really do appreciate. I'm also sharing with you some of the visitor figures that we've collected at the National Park Authority of some of our car parks. We have a number of car parks along Hadrian's Wall. And actually you can see last year, the grey line is the 2020 set of figures. And you can see that because people weren't able to go to attractions, they were still driving out to our car parks. And in fact, we had more car park visitors last year during the sort of July, August than we had in the previous 2 years. And I think we're going to see more of that as well this year. So, you know, partly due to the fact that unfortunately we weren't able to operate the Hadrian's Wall bus from Easter, and when it did open, or when it did operate from early July, there were limitations on terms of passenger space in, and it could only operate at sort of 50% capacity at a maximum. And people were more dissuaded. There was also a lot of issues around communicating when it was safe to travel on public transport as well. So what we've seen, a lot of people driving out in their own cars. And I think that's going to be continuing this year as well. But, you know, these are the figures for the Sill National Landscape Discovery Centre. And even though when we did open, we saw the visitor numbers return to around about sort of 85% of what they were previously, what we also noticed is that people were still willing to spend the money that they hadn't spent on overseas holidays or going out. When they did come out, they wanted to spend their money, which I think is very encouraging. It's something that we should be aware of for the year ahead as well. Is the fact that maybe we obviously realize that some are going to be very affected financially and may not have the disposable income, but some will. The other thing that we learned was obviously, you know, people appreciated the countryside. They appreciated, you know, the attractions when they were able to reopen. But we also realized it's the small stuff, the toilets. You know, this is our toilet block at Caulfields. It was really, really important. The small stuff is just as important as the big stuff. Having car parks open, having toilets open along the trail was really, really important. And we were very much sort of informed and benefited from the input from Nigel Jarvis from the Heart of Hadrian's Wall Tourism Association, you know, who was representing the accommodation sector and the tourism sector and the businesses, who were saying, well, look, I'm getting inquiries, but people just don't want to know what's happening in the area immediately around my accommodation. They want to have the confidence to know what was happening further along the wall as well. And it's really important to sort of present that kind of holistic picture of the wall to visitors. And that's really what we're trying to do, is trying to make it as you know, whenever possible, to try and ensure that visitors had a complete overview of what was available on the wall. But then we had visitors of a different nature, and Robson Green, bless him, took the most unusual route along Hadrian's Wall that I've ever known, to be perfectly honest. But, you know, he does have a following, and he made some wonderful visits to some attractions here up at Vindolanda, at Chester's, at Corbridge with Paul Tate. I love that version of him being taken around the museum there. And, you know, without doubt, you know, he really did love his whole experience. And I think it would be very interesting to see, you know, how this pans out in the future, because people do remember seeing that on TV. I don't know what the viewing figures were, but we know that in the past, you know, it did stimulate a lot of new visits by visitors when he did the sort of Tales from Northumberland series. And we've also had Vera out. She was out for a few days, so pitched up at Walltown for a few days, and even renamed the national park. So when you see the episode, it will be Disley National Park, wherever that is. But never mind, it's all good coverage. And we did get an enormous amount of coverage, and many thanks to all of the sites and attractions, especially Vindolanda, who hosted so many sort of TV crews throughout the summer and did a very good job as being ambassadors for Hadrian's Wall. So the lessons learned, well, first of all, safety first, reassurance, making sure that the visitors feel safe, feel welcome, and that we're good to go is really, really important. booking in advance is now the norm. So businesses along the wall, we now are fully aware of the public expectation to book in advance. And that's something that I think is going to continue for some time. The trend for the great outdoors, reconnecting with nature. People in lockdown have rediscovered that sense of wonder around nature. And I think that's something that we should be tapping into over the next few months or so, and reminding people that, you know, as well as the wonderful visitor attractions and sites along Hadrian's Wall, we've got, you know, miles and miles of empty space, fresh air, and dark skies to explore. The rediscovery of Hadrian's Wall by local people in the region. As I say, we saw a lot of visitors coming out from the northeast and rediscovering the wall. Some people were saying to us, I've lived in Newcastle all my life, but I've never been out to Hadrian's Wall before. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well this summer. We have to expect the fact that most people are going to continue coming out in the car until clarification around public transport is sorted out. People are going to be driving out here, so we need to be aware of that. And we also, as I say, the visitor behavior that we saw, you know, with the fly camping and the litter, that's something that we do need to be aware of, but we need to engage them. We don't want to dissuade. We spent a lot of time trying to encourage people who've never come out to Hadrian's Wall to visit Hadrian's Wall. The last thing we want to do is to send them away. We need to encourage them to come, but use the opportunity to talk about how to look after the countryside. And the last couple of slides, again, this is the data from the Visit Britain Consumer Sentiment Survey. This gives us an indication of how visitors are feeling about making the next trip out or the next tourism trip. And we can see that the Northeast isn't, you know, is in the relatively low quartile for where people expect to go when they next plan ahead. So we need to do a lot more to raise the profile of Hadrian's Wall and have a national marketing campaign to remind people how wonderful the Hadrian's Wall experience is. We also know that people are still, you know, preferring to explore the great outdoors and outdoor activities. So again, that's something we need to focus on in the marketing in the next 12 months as well. So, as I say, we're still busy. We're still planning for reopening. We're still planning different scenarios, how to prepare for reopening this spring and summer. We've got events and festivals that are being developed. And I know Bill's going to be talking more about the 1900 event in 2022, but there are going to be a lot more events taking place before then as well. We need to develop new experiences. The National Park is working with other national parks, developing new bookable experiences. And we also need to foster greater integration and collaboration between just not the sites and services, but, you know, transport as well, and providing perhaps itineraries, making it easier for people to book and visit Hadrian's Wall as well. And we also need to look to extend the season as well. You know, we still tend to focus a little bit on the summer as where the bulk of the tourism activity takes place. But actually, you know, we have, you know, England's largest dark sky park. We have, you know, wonderful opportunities to enjoy and explore the wildlife value of the wall as well. So I think we need to sort of look to extend the season and make sure that visitor economy benefits throughout the year. And of course, there are lots of funding and investment opportunities that we're focusing on as well collectively. So this is my last image, and this is a lovely image that I hope Vindolanda don't mind, but I took it off their Facebook page of the reconstruction under a beautiful, pristine, dark sky. And it's just a reminder that, you know, as well as enjoying Hadrian's Wall during the daytime, especially in the autumn and winter months, there's so much more potential that we could develop around events and activities linked to our dark skies and our natural environment as well. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm happy if there's a few minutes to answer any questions, but as I say, it's been a very busy few months. It's still very busy, but we are preparing and we're looking forward to seeing visitors come back to Hadrian's Wall as soon as it's safe to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.
So share screen. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, so Really, I'm going to try and give you a quick summary of what has happened in the past 12 months with WallCAP, because there was that little pandemic thing, and what we're hoping to do in the remaining months of the project, because I'm afraid, sadly, that I have to tell you, our project will be ending in December of 2021. So to quote a famous song, we are in the final countdown, but we have many months left and actually the best weather of the year coming ahead, and good news, of course, with rollouts of vaccines and things. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, but this will give you an update, and everything I say today will be able to be discussed and considered in more detail on, I believe is it Monday or Tuesday, when we have the WallCAP sessions, specific WallCAP sessions. So with that in mind, 2020 didn't quite go exactly the way we'd planned it. I don't think it went the way that anyone planned it. We had a really ambitious plan for fieldwork. Our fieldwork was largely scheduled. We already had things arranged to start in late March of 2020. And as news kept spreading around the world about this new pandemic, we kind of were biting our fingernails, and we did eventually have to call it off. So in effect, what really happened with 2020 is that we've lost well, a full year of our intended fieldwork program. What we did try to do, however, was switch and pivot to more digital delivery. So we did a number of things that we could do digitally. So I'll talk about those a little bit, and we can hear more about those later in the week. But there's a couple other things that I'd like to highlight, and that's that we had some staff changes in 2020. That despite all the restrictions that a global pandemic created, as Nikki Garland and Paul Frodstone left our project to pursue very exciting opportunities, we needed a new project support officer and community archaeologist. And I'm delighted to say that we were able to recruit incredible candidates. So our choice was fantastic. And the people who were appointed, and I'm very grateful that accepted the posts, joined our project in September. With full steam ahead. They hit the ground running and have done fantastic things. And so that's Catherine Murphy, who's our project support officer, who many of you will have met, and Jane Harrison, who's our community archaeologist, who you won't have had as much opportunity to have met in person, of course, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but you will have met during some of our online training programs. And so they've been a great and very welcome addition to the team, and have brought all sorts of new contributions to the project. So what have we done in those last months? Well, as I said, we've pivoted to digital. One of the things I'm just going to highlight that has been extremely helpful, because it's been able to be done in a very COVID-safe fashion, is that the volunteers helping to populate our GIS. Now, there's not that snazzy a picture. GIS isn't always exactly photogenic for a PowerPoint presentation. But what's happened is that our volunteers have been fantastic. We've kind of set some templates looking for information to be filled out. We can then add to our GIS database. And what this information does is really allows us to start interrogating the wall using GIS, which is a computer program, geographic information system, that allows for kind of geospatial analysis of things. And so what we've been able to do is progress on populating that GIS system, which will be a fantastic tool, not just for us, but for everyone when the project is done. It also hasn't been all digital. As things started to open up in late summer and early autumn, Jane Harrison launched herself into that very narrow window of opportunity. And we were able to get some work done at Steel Rig and Cat Stairs. So this is some consolidation work along the old Clayton Wall, where there was collapses. Unfortunately, of course, we couldn't involve volunteers, but it did mean that some really important consolidation work was completed before the winter months set in, and almost certainly would have made, with the freezing action, if you can think of all the snow and those really cold, icy nights, that freeze thaw action actually would have made some of that collapse and that condition worse. So that was a great result. And we also had a very brief excavation at Walltown Crags, where I hope you can see, if you can see my little cursor moving, there were concerns about the exposure of the core of the wall as it was revealed about a bit more than a century ago. So we did a little bit of excavation, mostly kind of revealing the remains as they were. We didn't dig into the wall. We didn't want to undermine it or worsen its condition. It was then followed up by further consolidation. And so again, Jane has written a report on this. All the work is complete. It's been fully consolidated as well. And you can hear more about that later this week. So it's not to say that everything was digital this past year. There were a couple more physical interventions and contact, but we've mostly been trying to work to be able to include our volunteers and everyone in a very safe way without endangering anyone, but it still allows us to get on. So it's what to expect next. What can we do in these coming months? Well, as long as we have COVID conditions, whether it's lockdown or a reduced lockdown, semi-lockdown, semi-opening up. I'm not quite sure if we've got all the terminology yet for the government's phased plans, but we will work with those as best as possible. As soon as it's safe, we really do want to get back out in the field we want to do live in-person events. We miss seeing all our volunteers. There's something, what's great is that we have the technology to do these things digitally, but there's also something to be said about face-to-face contact or mask-to-mask contact, as it were. There's a certain energy that comes from that. So we want to do that. In the meantime, we'll continue to deliver digitally as much as we can. So what you can expect to see in 2021 are further, more additional online training and learning opportunities. We are approaching the final stages of an app that we will allow you to take photographs and create a 3D model of kind of buildings and monuments. So when you're out for your exercise, you can be snapping away and have something to show for it afterwards. We've been continuing to work with the SIL, Northumberland National Park SIL, Tully House, and the Great North Museum about exhibitions that will open up in 2021. And of course, subject to government guidance, there will be more fieldwork. In brief, we have some priorities. Headed on the Wall is a location where we started some field work, and we really must see that through. We're not certain if that will be a possibility to involve volunteers. It seems unlikely at the moment, but it's the work that we need to finish because that gives us a much better understanding of the long-term influence of agriculture on the vallum. And so we've already done bits of field work, so this is a priority for us to finish so we can wrap it up. We don't want to leave anything half done. That's just unprofessional. But also we want to see that through and better understand. There's also a site at Port Carlisle where there's a fantastic opportunity to consolidate the westernmost upstanding stretch of Hadrian's Wall. And that's something else that we want to see through. This has been a real long-term issue for everyone. And we're very fortunate that WallCAP has the budget to be able to sort this out. And so we're very committed to trying to do that before the end of the year. Those two sites, I'm not sure that we'll be able to get volunteers at, but thinking about how we can conduct fieldwork in safer conditions before things get back to kind of fully normal as they were pre-COVID. We're planning all our fieldwork and all our in-person events really for possible opportunities. The ideal, of course, is number one, that it's kind of full normal conditions with WallCAP team and volunteers. More likely is options 2 and 3, in which we're having those events with some restricted conditions, which will have the WallCAP team and quite limited numbers of volunteers, or worse, if things don't open up, is that it's only the WallCAP team and kind of other hired professionals. And this is just partly because of the government regulations and guidelines for these practices. And the worst possible scenario really is that we continue to have to deliver digitally. So our commitment is to be as inclusive and involving as possible. But of course, we're trying to bear everyone's health in mind and just follow that best advice that our scientists and medical practitioners are providing. The last thing we want is for us to try and do something fun and then we all get arrested on Hadrian's Wall. That's just not sending out the right message, even if it would be an excellent YouTube video. So one of the sites we're hoping to get back to is Cambeck. Again, we're just going to see how that goes in terms of conditions. There's further understanding of what's happened to the wall there and its robbing and how it crosses the actual beck. But what we're really hoping is that we can get back to Corbridge. This is something that we're planning for the summer. We'd like to think that by summer, we'll have met all those conditions in terms of health, so things will open up a bit. And Corbridge is a site in terms of both space and access that would really be the most flexible for allowing people to join us. So that is our ideal. That is our hope. I can't promise anything, of course. We're just as much reliant on what Bojo says as the rest of the nation. But that's our aspiration. That's partly, because the field work that goes with our heritage at risk work just does require field work. But that said, there's other work. There's the whole stone sourcing and dispersal strand. And actually, this is one of the things that we've been able to progress on quite nicely through lockdown. But we really do want to get back out in the field. We know that people are enjoying the walks that our geologist Ian Keel has been leading in pointing out the really, when we say long-term history, as an archaeologist, we think thousands of years, but Ian, as a geologist, thinks in terms of millions of years. And he looks at those rocks formations and tells us how they formed and what that means. So we want to get back to those geology walks where we can look at the earth and see how that rock is formed, what that means about our landscape. We want to get back out at various sites along the wall and record the stonework and see what the Romans did, how they used that local material and put it to use in building their sites and the monuments that are left to us. And of course, we want to look at more buildings where that Roman stone has been reused. There are many people attending today that we've spoken to and that we want to be working with and continue to work with. We've got a big wall and we've only got so many months to cover it. So our attentions are really trying to highlight what is achievable and feasible, but can also be inclusive in a safe way for everyone. And that is it, I'm afraid. I rushed through that faster than I thought I would, but I'm quite willing, if that's okay, Jane, as chair, to kind of take questions, because I appreciate that people will have questions if they're not able to attend later in the week.
Hope you can all see this. Welcome all. This is really an advertorial for the session on Friday to talk in a little more detail about the forthcoming festival. Folks, this began here last year in Carlisle. We were starting to think amongst all partners that we should do something about the 100th anniversary of the wall, which is of course next year. The subject was raised last year, and it was realised that the way to do this festival is to make it a festival for everyone, a genuine community festival that everyone can take part and join in on their own terms. So obviously we were going to get straight on with that after Carlisle last year, and the year of 2020 hit, and of course that slowed things up a little. All the partner organisations have been head down trying to work out what next week went, not let alone what next year or the year after would mean. So we had to get our heads down and focus on the here and now at that point. However, we have been beavering away behind the scenes, and it'll be my great pleasure to introduce you to a couple of colleagues shortly, because we found a little bit of money to hire some coordinating producers and work on development of the festival. So now I think you need to try and pin these two, this is a technical term which I do not understand, on your
Bill.
Yep, Maddie.
I asked Kerry, and apparently if we just talk, we'll appear at the top of people's screens.
Okay, great, thank you. So Maddie, it's my great pleasure therefore to introduce Maddie Morn, who is one of our coordinating producers, and Ellie Turner, who is our other one. Where are you, Ellie?
If Ellie says hi, she should appear.
Hi, I'm here. Nice to meet you.
So my role in this is I am chair of the Hadrian's Wall 900 steering group and also a member of the Hadrian's Wall board. We are a group of people that are coming together to really try and make this festival happen, but it's going to be about what you as communities decide you wish to do. So without further ado, I'll just ask Maddie and Ellie to introduce themselves. Maybe Ellie first.
Yeah, fine. I'll keep it very brief. My name's Ellie Turner, and I'm delighted to be working on the 1900 Festival. I have kind of 20 years experience, I suppose, working in outdoor arts and events on varying scales and in varying places around the UK and in Europe, and love to work on projects which are inspired by landscape, heritage and culture. It's something that I've been doing for a long time, and delighted to be working with Maddie. So Maddie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, every time Ellie and I do an introduction, we basically want to say the same thing because our kind of work is very similar. So I've got a bit less experience than Ellie, but love to do projects that are inspired by landscape heritage. And I've worked on lots of kind of citywide projects and love to do things with community at the heart where the passion really lies. So yeah, we're really excited to be here and it's great to see you all and looking forward to our session on Friday as well.
Okay, thank you both. So the most important thing, as you can see from the side, is we have a logo. No project is complete without a logo. This is ours. We wanted a logo that, you know, does what it says on the tin. It's about the 1900th anniversary. We wanted something that didn't make it too much of anything, because this festival, our overall idea is this is about celebrating 1900 years of the World Heritage Site in whatever it means to people. So it's not a Romans festival. It's not a festival about an emperor. It's a festival about a place, about a monument. So it's a festival that people can really interpret in their own way and get involved in, because we know from WallCAP and from other places, an awful lot of people live along the line of the wall and are fascinated by it. That's why we're all here today when we could be outside in the sun. But it's far more fascinating to be inside talking about Hadrian's Wall than sunbathing in February. But there are also a lot of other people who don't know much about the wall on which they live. And this festival is a chance for us to maybe do something about that. Obviously, we hope it will attract tourists for the future and things like that. But really what we want to do is get the people that live on Hadrian's Wall really, really excited about it and about what it can really offer to them. So we're in a good question about the barbarian colour. The colours do vary, but you're right, that is the line of Hadrian's Wall picked out in the middle of that slide. So there you are. Well spotted, Gillian. First thing to fess up, we've no money, folks, for this festival. We are trying to find some. We're working very hard on this. That was the big job last year. And of course, what's happened is all the major funders who one might go to have all quite properly and sensibly been focused on supporting people in COVID recovery. They've been sensible and looked at the here and now, what we need to do to make sure our cultural infrastructure in this country survives. So that has been happening. So we're now starting to see some conversations happening about potential bids for funding. We've found a little bit so far, which is enabling us to employ Maddie and Ellie. It is only a little bit. If we don't raise any more money, they stop in September. So checks will be received. No. We are obviously working very, very hard to try and make sure we can find money to make sure this festival launches, but happens in a big style. But if we don't get the money, this is still happening. Folks, there's a logo. It's got to happen now. Once there's a logo, it's happening. So we are going to deliver this between us all, and I better tell you a little bit about what that might mean. So it is absolutely something for everyone. Obviously, you have to have some criteria for a festival to make sure people fit in. So here's our criteria. It's got to happen between Hadrian's birth on the 24th of January and the end of the Festival of Saturnalia on the 23rd of December. So we're pretty much taking up the whole year. Normally, we'd expect to take place within 10 miles of key World Heritage Site locations. That is, of course, within 10 miles of the line of Hadrian's Wall itself. But let us not forget our Roman fort in South Shields, and also the Cumbrian coastline from Bowness-on-Solway down to Ravenglass. So it is the full World Heritage Site that we mean when we say within 10 miles. And that's nominally, you know, if something happens that really fits the festival in London, then so be it. But normally we'd expect to be within the World Heritage Site area. It must have appropriate reference to the anniversary and 19th history of Hadrian's Wall. What does that mean? It could mean something that explores the people of the wall from all backgrounds. It could be something that explores the environment of the wall. It could be looking at World Heritage status and World Heritage UNESCO values. I would be surprised if there wasn't quite a bit around archaeology and heritage of the Roman army and frontiers, not least because I'll be doing some of that. And just plain 1900 years of history, life on the wall, and indeed promoting Hadrian's Wall as a visitor destination, because that's part of this, isn't it? We love the wall, we want to engage more people with it, and we want it to play an ever bigger part in our region, making our region come to life, really. So all that's there. We are saying be suitable for family audiences. All I mean by that is if you want to program something that isn't suitable, we're not going to put it in the overall brochure now, are we? You know, we'd have to put warnings in place. So normally programming should be for family audiences. We wanted to consider promoting diversity, as you'd expect. We want people to consider accessibility of the events. So if you're planning an event And I always say with this festival, it could be anything from as small as you want to bake a cake in the shape of a Roman shield, up to you want to spend millions of pounds on a major cultural intervention. Along anything between those 2 points is fine, really, not too fussed. But these are what you need to think about. You need to think about where it takes place, when it takes place, that it absolutely references all the different themes. But you're really thinking about how people are going to get to it, and you're really thinking about that environmental impact, that sustainable event as well. But the point is, we haven't got any money to give you. Okay, so don't ask us for any money. We're busy looking for it ourselves. I'd love to be able to come back in a few months and say that's changed. We have found some money, but right about now, I have to be dead honest with you. And what we can do is create a promotional framework, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I keep saying we. Who the heck is we? So here's our steering group. So you have myself there. There'll be other names you recognise. This is a coalition of the willing and or the insane. I don't know which some days, depending on what we've taken on. This is absolutely a coming together of people who roll their sleeves up. Now, on a lot of steering groups, people are there to represent their organisations and things like that. And that's perfectly normal and right and good and proper. On this group, you're here because you've rolled your sleeves up and you're going to make the festival happen. I don't think that should come as anyone whose name is on that. It shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. That's the deal. And that's what we need to do now, folks, over this next year, is really roll up our sleeves and make this happen. So I'm going to move on quickly now to Ellie, who is going to explain a little bit about our session on the 5th of March. Ellie, over to you.
Thanks, Bill. I'm not going to say a lot because I'm going to encourage you to come on Friday. So Maddie and I are going to run a couple of hours session, 2 till 4. Bill will also be there. And that's the opportunity really for us to go into more detail about the festival. So the vision, ambition, the festival criteria, how that works, what that looks like, maybe some more of our ideas. But also one of the things that Maddie and I have been brought in to do, obviously, is to kind of drive it forward and start making it a reality. But also we are looking at how we can put together guidance and support which helps people who want to run their events. So no, we don't have any money to give people at this point in time, certainly, but we will be looking at how we can kind of look after people who are going to take part. Some people will be experienced at running events, some people won't be, and just trying to sort of make that an easy journey for people and make people feel involved in the festival across the board, really. There's going to be lots of opportunity for question and answers. We want it to be quite a relaxed session, lots of chance for you to kind of ask in more detail about what's going on, and maybe share ideas. If you've got ideas already, we'd love to start hearing about them. Obviously, we will talk to you about how you can kind of officially start to get involved. We do have a way that you'll be able to do that, even if your ideas aren't fully formed, so that you can start to receive any information that we might be sharing and hear about any contact events that we might start to run. And we'll be putting together toolkits that help you with marketing and maybe looking for your own funds if that's what you need to do, and certainly sort of running events. And we'll also be encouraging you to spread the word about the festival. And so I'm going to let Maddie talk a little bit more about that. Marketing have been working quite hard. We have a marketing subgroup. And so, yes, I'll let Maddie mention a bit more about that.
Would you mind skipping to the next slide, Bill? Perfect. Yes, so we actually we were originally going to launch our kind of public facing call to action on the 18th of April, and because of our events with you on Friday, we thought, you know what, let's just get it out in the ether and get people excited. So we'll talk a bit more about it on Friday, but effectively at the end of our session, that is the time that we are launching the festival. So we will have a press release and that'll go onto the website as a news story and hopefully out to some local media. That press release is, the frame of this launch is very much about the encouragement to anyone that wants to get involved in the festival to get involved and the ways in which people can do that. So in addition to that news story that hopefully goes through partners, goes onto websites and maybe some local media, we'll also have some social media assets which are kind of logos, hashtags, and basically get involved, and then direction as to how people can then do that. So I don't think there's much more to say on that, but apart from that, we'll send you that information directly and those assets or links to those assets in the news story, so that you can really help us to share and spread the word.
So there you have it, folks. You heard it here first. It was important to us, reflecting on it, that this is the right place to launch this festival, because it's about the communities of the Wall, and you are the communities of the Wall. This is where we begin. It is really kind of over to you now, and in many ways we Maddie, Ellie and the rest of us almost moved to becoming your support for whatever it is you wish to do. And at the end of it, hopefully we'll have a year when the Wall is branded up with the 1900 logo. You know, people will notice us. We'll attract a lot more attention to the Wall. We'll get people excited about it, and we'll have a rare old fun time, I hope. So I shall shut up at this point and look forward to seeing more of you on Friday, and indeed maybe questions as we have a few minutes, perhaps.
We do.